Hello everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I will be doing my summer wrap-up where I will be reviewing the 7 books that I read throughout the months of May, June, and July. Now I know that only reading 7 books throughout those 3 months does not sound like very much, but I was really busy when I was out of town doing my opera gig, but I still got to read some really good books. So without further ado, let's just get into it. The first book that I got to read over the summer was Speak by Lori Halls Anderson. This is a book that I actually got to listen to on audiobook while I was driving from home to my gig, which was about 11 or 12 hours away, so I definitely had a lot of time to do some listening. So as a lot of you may know, this is a very popular book, just made its 20th anniversary very recently, and I was able to also listen to the audiobook that was done specifically for the 20th anniversary. So this book seems to be kind of a landmark in terms of YA books that talk about really difficult topics. This plot centers around Melinda, who is a freshman in high school, and essentially she attends this end of summer big bash party that a lot of people from her high school go to, and she ends up calling the cops and essentially ending the party. So everybody knows that it was her that called the cops, and so she is essentially a social outcast. And as time passes in this book, she essentially becomes more and more isolated and kind of stops talking altogether, especially in school, but she does discover how much she loves art class, and she's really good at art as well. And so it's through her work making these incredible art pieces that she comes to terms with the fact that she was sexually assaulted at this party. And what makes the situation worse is that her assailant still goes to her high school and is still very much a threat to her. First of all, I totally recommend listening to the 20th anniversary edition. So what's really cool is that there's a really cool letter written by Jason Reynolds, who I've talked about before. I read his book Long Way Down last year and absolutely loved it and plan on reading more of his books in the future. And then there's a really great interview with Lori Halls Anderson herself that is at the end of this audiobook that I thought was just so informative and just so great and powerful, and I think just pairs so beautifully with this story. I think what also makes these bonus contents so valuable is that they're also just so informative about rape culture and consent. Honestly, I for one thing, can't believe it took me so long to finally read this book. I have read quite a few books that have been sort of successors to this, books that were written in the past couple of years that I just absolutely loved and I thought were so powerful, such as The Way It Used to Be and Girl Made of Stars, but I knew that I had to eventually read this book, and I'm so glad that I finally did. I do think that because I've read successors to this novel, this book didn't have quite as much of an impact on me as it probably would have. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. Because I didn't read this one first, I do kind of think that I missed out on a part of the experience, if that makes sense. So all that to say, if you slept on this book like I did, don't. Read this one first before you read any of the other books that were written afterwards. I really just think that this is the book you should be starting with if you are starting to read books that deal with this topic. I think that this is just the perfect book to start with. That being said though, if the topic of rape is triggering to you, definitely do not read this. This book definitely goes into detail about the assault as well as another attempted assault later on in the book. I did want to talk a little bit about the scene where the rape occurs, so if you think that will be triggering to you, definitely stop watching here, and I'll put a timestamp right here as to where you could go when I start talking about the next book that I read. I want to talk about how interesting it was how the scene was paced. In that the scene is actually very fast-paced. And what's interesting about that is that all the other books that I have read that deal with this topic, when they deal with the specific scene where the rape occurs, usually the scene is very slowed down to put in as much detail as possible, but the way that Lori Halls Anderson wrote this was just so fast-paced and just so, I guess, overwhelming, frantic, and crazy. I just feel like that's very realistic to the way that a lot of these assaults occur. You could tell that Melinda herself didn't even really know what was happening until pretty much it was over, and I feel like that happens a lot to a lot of assault survivors. Melinda didn't even have much time to react before her assailant silenced her and hurt her, and I feel like that happens all too often. I'm not saying that the way Anderson wrote the scene is any better than the way that other authors have written it. I just thought that it was different and it just felt more realistic and all the more powerful. Okay, I'm done talking about this book. As you can tell, I have a lot of things to say about this. I completely recommend it. Yeah, it was a very powerful book and I did end up giving it 4 stars. Okay, so now I'm gonna get to all of the books that I read on my Kindle, so I'm just gonna go ahead and put the covers of them over here. But the first one I wanted to talk about is The Siren by Tiffany Tiffany Reese. Now, I've read a few of Tiffany Reese's books in the past, and I really enjoyed them, but this book, The Siren, is a part of a series called the Original Sinners series, I believe, and this book, and I'm sure the rest of this series overall, just has a completely different tone to the more lighthearted books of hers that I've read. So essentially, notorious Nora Sutherland is famous for her delicious works of erotica, each one more popular with readers than the last. But her latest manuscript is different, more serious, more personal, and she's sure it'll be her breakout book. Zachary Easton holds Nora's fate in his well-manicured hands. The demanding British editor agrees to handle the book on one condition: he wants complete control. Nora must rewrite the entire novel to his exacting standards in 6 weeks or it's no deal. So that is the basic plot of this book. I thought that this was such a great start to this series. I've actually never read an erotic book quite like this because in this book, there were no gratuitous sex scenes. I thought it was just really, really well written overall. I thought the writing style was pretty simple, but it's also beautiful and poetic. Also, I really appreciate how multifaceted all the characters are, and I'm really, really looking forward to reading the next book in this series, and I did give this one a very enthusiastic 4 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is The Good Luck Charm by Helena Hunting. So this is a second chance romance, which is actually one of my favorite tropes in romance novels, and this centers around Lila and Ethan, and essentially Ethan left Lila when they were ending their high school years to really be serious about his hockey career, and so they have been apart for I think about 8 years. So essentially what happens is there is a situation where they get reunited with each other, and at first Lila is definitely very standoffish to Ethan, as she naturally would be, and I would be as well, because he's the one that dumped her 8 years ago. And Ethan actually wants to kind of pick up where they left off because he's realized that he's still in love with her. And yeah, the plot kind of goes on from there. I really, really enjoyed this book. This has been one of my favorite smutty romances that I've read in a while. I really loved how Lila and Ethan's relationship developed throughout. And yeah, I don't have much more to say except that I definitely want to check out more of Helena Hunting's works in the future. And again, I gave this one a very enthusiastic 4 stars. Okay, the next book I'm going to talk about is The DILF by Amy Andrews. This is actually a book that I got off of NetGalley a couple months ago, and to be honest with you guys, I really was not expecting much out of this book because the title's pretty trashy and so is the cover, and so I thought that it was just gonna be maybe a 3-star book, just something to read in my spare time, but I actually enjoyed it a lot. So this story centers around Owen and Stephanie. Owen, I think, is 10 years younger than Stephanie, so there's a little bit of an age difference there, and essentially Owen is best friends with Stephanie's younger brother, and so that's how they've known each other for pretty much all of their lives, and Owen has had a crush on Stephanie pretty much his whole life, but Stephanie never gave him a second thought. And so in this book, as you can imagine, they get together, and yeah, the plot goes on from there. This book was so steamy. Yeah, it was so much better than I thought it was going to be. I really just had a great time reading it. I would completely recommend this as like a beach vacation type read because it was also very fast paced and just really fun. So yeah, I think I gave this one 4 stars as well, and I definitely want to check out more of Amy Andrews' books in the future. Okay, so the next book I want to talk about is Addicted to You by Krista and Becca Ritchie. This is a smutty romance that I think is actually part of a series of like 4 books or so, but I only read this one, and to be honest, I really don't feel the need to continue. It's not that the book was bad, it's just that I thought the ending was wrapped up into not necessarily a neat little bow, but it was wrapped up enough that I just don't feel the need to continue on. So essentially this story follows Lily and Loren, I believe that's how his name is pronounced, and basically they're both addicted to something. Lily is actually addicted to sex, and Loren is addicted to alcohol. He's an alcoholic. And so essentially what happens is that they have been best friends for years, but they do decide to go into a relationship with one another. And basically as their addictions get worse and worse throughout the book, they kind of cling to each other more and more in this kind of destructive relationship. This was a very unique book in that the relationship between the 2 main characters is just something very different from most relationships in smutty romance novels. I, for one, have never read a book from the point of view of a sex addict, so I thought that was really interesting. Like, listening to her inner monologue and her mindset as to why she is the way she is. The plot overall went in a very different direction than I was expecting. I don't want to like spoil anything for you guys, but I just thought that was interesting to note. And I also gave this one 4 stars. Okay, and the next book I want to talk about is Friend Request by Laura Marshall. This is a book that I've actually been interested to read for a while. I picked this one out of my TBR jar. The plot essentially reminds me of that film Unfriended, and then there's also another movie called Unfriended Dark Web. So let me just tell you a little bit about the plot and then I'll get into my review. So I'm just gonna read the inside flap. Okay, so this book, I would say the first half of the book takes place in 2 different time periods. So one of them is 1989, and it says, when Louise first notices the new girl who has mysteriously transferred late into their senior year, Maria seems to be everything Louise's other friends aren't. Authentic, funny, brash. Within just a few days, Maria and Louise are on their way to becoming fast friends. Then there's also 2016, which is present day because this was written in 2016. It says, Louise receives a heart-stopping email. Maria Weston wants to be friends on Facebook. Long-buried memories quickly rise to the surface. Those first days of their budding friendship, cruel decisions made, and dark secrets kept. The night that would change all their lives forever. So I think I'm going to keep the plot at that because this is a mystery thriller, and with those type of books, I know that me personally, the less I know going into it, the more that I tend to enjoy it. So yeah, I'm going to stop the synopsis there. So essentially, I was kind of flip-flopping between a 3.5 and a 4, but I did settle on a 4-star rating. There were times that I thought that the story was moving at a really good pace, and I was really interested to see what was going to happen next, but there were also parts of the story, I think towards the middle, where I feel like there was a lull, there wasn't a lot happening, and there wasn't a lot keeping me interested in the storyline. One thing to note, I felt like the characters in this book were overall very odd, if that makes sense. Louise is not like the perfect protagonist. I didn't find myself rooting for her in any way. Really, for me, what kept me hooked was the overall premise, and by the end, I was super hooked, really into the story. Plot twist really took me by surprise. I thought it was a really, really solid plot twist. Okay, and the last book I'm going to talk about is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This is a book that was highly, highly recommended by so many booktubers that I watch. Yeah, so many people gave this one 5 stars. I actually was lucky enough to get an ARC of this off of NetGalley, and needless to say, I did go in with very high expectations. And while I enjoyed this book, I definitely didn't love it as much as everybody else seems to. I did give it 4 stars. But before I get into my review, let me just tell you what this book is about. So there is Alex, who is the first son of the United States. In this book, essentially in 2016, there was a woman named Ellen that was elected to be president, and Alex is her son. And there is also Prince Henry, who is from the UK, England. And so Henry and Alex have been kind of in a rivalry for the past couple of years. Alex really hates Henry. He thinks he's just really stuck up and kind of an asshole. So essentially there's this big event, I think it's somebody's wedding, and Alex and Henry basically end up crashing into the wedding cake and making this big scandal. And so to make all of that go away, the PR teams of both Henry and Alex make a plan for Alex and Henry to kind of fake a friendship. And if you know anything at all about this book, this is an LGBTQ romance, so there's definitely a relationship that develops between Alex and Henry. Given that this book takes place during the year of Alex's mother's re-election or potential re-election, there's a lot of politics in this book. Also, Alex himself wants to be a politician. So yeah, there's just a lot of politics throughout this book. And honestly, I felt that there was a little too much politics. Because honestly, I don't care all that much about that kind of stuff. And I just felt like the whole re-election thing, and there's so many other things going on besides Alex and Henry's relationship that, to be honest, I really wasn't all that interested in. And especially in the last, I would say 35% or so of this book, there was just so much politics and like so many other things happening that I really didn't care all that much about. And so it kind of made my reading experience a little bit tedious, to be quite honest. And I also think that overall this book could have been quite a bit shorter. I think 423 pages is a bit long for a new adult romance, but I do want to go back to the positives. Oh my god, I love Alex and Henry and their relationship so much. Part of me wishes that they were real people and that this was a real situation. One, because we would have a kick-ass female president, and two, we would have like the most amazing power couple ever in Alex and Prince Henry. I also loved the pacing of how their relationship developed from hate to love, but I do definitely recommend this. I think the romance in it is just so good, and if you are someone that is into politics, I think you would probably end up giving this 5 stars, but I did end up giving this book 4 stars. And that is going to be it for my summer wrap-up, everyone. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope that you would consider subscribing, and don't forget to click that notification bell button down below so that you will be notified every time I upload. See you in the next video. Bye!